A is new point 0, 0. Because the point takes the x and the y coordinate, because we're just mapping a point to the plane. This is not rocket science, right? It's kind of straightforward. Now we need to do from point A square out to the right, measuring 1/4 circumference of the chest. Okay, circumference of the chest. How do we get that in FreeSewing? Well, you get an object that is called measurements. You can also be structure. And it holds all the measurements that the user supplied in millimeters. Okay, cool. So we can do measurement chest over 4. Alright. So far, so good. We got this. Now we need to add 2 inches. Okay. That's a bit of a problem when we think about the fact that we need to support gold clothes and grown-ups. How do we translate these 2 inches into something that makes sense? And what even are these 2 inches? Well, it says there this is ease, but like, what is ease? Right? I think we probably need to do a little side adventure here and explain what ease is. Don't worry, just one slide. So ease is what is extra fabric in the garment that allows you to move. So that lady on the left would not be able to move her arm if there was no ease in the garment. You would get stuck, right? So this is sort of like functional ease. It's added to the garment so that you can move, right? And you also have design ease. In the middle, the t-shirt that lady is wearing is way too big. I mean, if you don't see it, that's fine. But trust me, it's way too big. You see the shoulder seam? That's halfway around down her arm. But that's just a style choice. So when we say it's too big, it's not too big. It's absolutely fine. But like, if you look at the sewing pattern, it's like the wrong size for her. It's a style choice. So that's design ease. And then finally, we also have negative ease. Negative ease is when the garment is actually too small. But, and you can also, you need stretch to use negative ease, and this is typically used so that the garment is not tight. Sportswear, swimwear, skinny jeans, they all have negative ease. All right, back to it. So we know, okay, so this is ease, so how do we do that? So in FreeSewing, we're going to define a so-called design option. Because if we're adding all this stuff, why not let the user control this? Why should we decide how much ease there is, right? So typically, we're going to destructure our options object, and then there's going to be an option, and we're going to call it chest ease now. And then we do 1 plus because it's a percentage, and divide by 4 and fulfill. Okay, points, got that. But we need to connect the dots at some point. So those we call paths. And I'll give you an example. So once again, just like we did with points and points constructor, we have paths which holds all the paths and the path constructor. Paths of example is new path. We instantiate paths with no parameters, and then we have all of these methods: smooth, line, curve, right? And if you've ever worked with PostScript, SVG, Canvas, or basically most graphics APIs, they all use this sort of way of drawing, right? Sort of this pen-polar way of doing it. So move somewhere without drawing a line, line draws a line, and then curve uses cubic Bezier curves. And once again, I don't have the time to explain what that is, but I assume a lot of you know, and if not, it's quite intuitive, check with YouTube. Okay. So, adding points and lines is, what's the value of this sewing? We also have a lot of sort of helper methods in our API to make it easy to do things that we typically do in sewing, right? You can 100% use this to do other 2D line drawing stuff, but like it's really for sewing patterns, An example here is shift fraction to words. You can pull it on a point, say like, okay, I need a point between these 2 points. That's sort of stuff. The paths also has a bunch of nets. Let me put them on the slide here quickly. Don't worry, I'm not going to go into them, but FreeSewing.dev/reference/API has all of the FreeSewing API documentation with examples and code and stuff like that. So, you can look into it. Okay, I'm going to give you a complete example now of how you can create a new design, as we call that, right? So the first thing you do is you import the design, what we call a super constructor from the FreeSewing core library. Then we have some internationalization data, we have some metadata about, and then we have our actual part of the constructor, right? And then to create a design, I've called it bottom, you do new design, because design is a super constructor, so it will return a constructor. And then you give it some metadata and basically the list. right? So we now have FOSDEM, which is a constructor, and if you instantiate it, you get a tag. So we have design and an instance of a design. And then we export that stuff. We use data export so people can, import the metadata without having to instantiate patterns. So let's look at all those different keywords that we have there. This is the internationalization data, aka translation. So our core library supports translation. And at a certain moment, we offered FreeSewing in, like the website, in 6 different languages. So we had to stop that and make things killings. So now we just export part of that. But we still support translation, we just only provide English. And these days with AI, people can get around that. So this is just a little bit of a structure with like the title and the design and the part names and the strings that you might be using, and then the options. And you see that I used hello FOSDEM there. So we have this thing where if you're going to put text in the pattern, you need to make sure that you're using actually a translation key rather than the real text that way. Then we have some metadata. This is where we blur the line between what the core library does and then what we do in our monorepo to file all these patterns together and do some information in the front end. The core library doesn't care at all about this. This is just to help front end integration, stuff like that. And then here we're finally at the good stuff. This is our part, The only difference is that where previously we said it's a function. Now our function is on the draft property, and we have some extra data. A name, we tell it which measurements are required, and our options and stuff like that. And the reason that this is important is that every part in FreeSewing stands on its own. So you can freely combine parts from different designs to make your own Frankenstein design. 100%. Okay, I'm gonna just briefly mention, so now we have a new design and it can go in our collection. I'm going to briefly skip through how you get from that design to the pattern. If you're interested, so you can just import your pattern there. We also import a plugin to style the SVG. And in the pattern is a new FOSDEM design. You give it all of the options that you want. You use the plugin and you call draft. And then when you call render on that, you get the SVG. That's all there is to it. If you want to get started with FreeSewing, you can start on your own with npx.freesewing Studio, which spins up our development environment, or you can check out either our monorepo or Codeberg or a fork of it, and then you can run npm these. For the people who have a sewing background, we often team up with people who have more of a coding background and people with more of a sewing background to make one design. So, in the Venn diagram, there's not that many people in the middle, so teaming up is a good way to go. So if you're watching streaming or here and more from the sewing background, you can totally reach out to us or hook you up with somebody who's good at code. So you can run FreeSewing in Node.js or another JavaScript runtime like Bun or Deno, the backend in a serverless function, or of course in the browser like we do on freesewing.eu. Looking at the clock, so there's stuff that we do for previous speaker talked about this. There's this difference between your target audience being developers or your target audience being users. So on the left side, we publish NVM packages, semantic versioning, we keep changelog API calls, developer experience, all of that stuff. But then on the right, it's like we have to create an entire UI, we have to support export to PDF, we have to let people tie page sizes for their printer. We need to provide sewing instructions, website docs, they need to be able to manage their account, like a whole bunch of stuff. And of course, the scope of the project gets quite a bit wider when you actually start building stuff for end users. So, this is sort of like a big thing. I want to quickly talk about the infrastructure we have in case there's people who are more from that background. So, we are hosted on static-host.eu today, which uses the Bunny CDN. The FreeSewing website is a completely static file of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So we basically ship all the code to the user and let them run it, sort of like a bring your own compute thing, which means that we don't have to pay for that, and that's good. Flip side of that is that we have to ship all of that code. So I think we passed 8 terabytes of bandwidth per month last year. So it's a lot. But thankfully, Static-Host has made a good deal for us. And then we have a backend, which is a REST API Express. We use SQLite because we like it simple. And then we also host our own forum instance. Okay, so lessons that I've learned as a maintainer. This has been a long journey. I learned a lot along the way. It wasn't always easy, so here are 3 tips for people who might end up in a similar situation. The first is to touch grass, as they say. This is me and my wife on a cycling trip. I like to cycle, and it's good to go out there and do something different. My day job is computers, FreeSewing is also computers, and like, you sometimes just need to do something. So, you know, while on one hand I want to encourage you to get into this stuff, on the other hand I'm also like, you know, step away from it. The second thing is that people come and go. This is my cat who passed away sadly last year, and I was really heartbroken by it, but then it's better to have had her than to have not had her. And I think it's the same with, you know, contributors or people who support the project financially. Like, they go, and you know, they might have other interests in the life and stuff like that, and like, it always does. But then you have to be, you know, mindful of the fact that, you know, there's all those people out there who didn't contribute, and you really need to be appreciative. And I am very appreciative of all the contributors of the song, all the people who support it. I think that's really good. And then the final piece of advice is that you should prepare for retirement. What I mean by that is that at the beginning you're going to be working on your own, right? And then at a certain moment you're going to have other people helping out. That is fantastic. But I think that you should always try to think about, okay, but like, what can I give away so that other people can take care of it, right? Because I think that the ultimate goal should be that the project outlives you and is bigger than what you can do. I think it's also a good ego check to be conscious of the fact, like, it would be good if I can give this to other people so that they can carry it even further than I have been carrying it. Alright, that's been a full man. And then the final thing that I want to get into is the sort of interdisciplinary thoughts. You know, I learned a lot through this journey. When I started out, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was so far out of my comfort zone. But like, when I look back now, I'm very happy of all the lessons that I learned, and I feel much more confident in the code I write and the stuff that I do, and it's been really great. But at the same time, the more I know, the more I am conscious of my own limitations, and the fact that, well, you know, yeah, I guess I'm a developer now, but like I'm sure that there's countless of people in this room who, you know, are much better at this stuff than I am. And then on the flip side of that, installing things, like, yeah, I'm pretty good at making codes. No, I can do that. But like, I also know a lot of people who are much better at that than I am, right? Yet somehow, in combining these two things, we sort of ended up with something that seems to be valuable to a lot of people. So if you're like me, first time at FOSDEM, or if you're just like a little bit like, I just don't think that I have what it takes to write a content framework or whatever. Like, you don't have to. You can look around to the other interests in your life and try to find out, are there ways there that I can sort of combine these things, combine different skills, and then come up with something that's, I don't know, any way. Do you have any questions?
I'm wondering if you have a way to translate patterns that I created in Simply to FreeSewing, and then moving on.
Yeah.
Simply is nice.
Yeah, so for people who don't know, just a bit of context, Simply Simply Valentina, they're reports of the same code base, is also a software to create sewing patterns, but it's like a point-and-click graphical thing, right? Whereas FreeSewing is patternless code. So to answer your questions, can those patterns be translated in principle? Yes, because they're defined in XML. But then the question is, what's the parametric angle? Because CD does not really enforce that the way that we do. So you can get a pattern, but with that pattern at work. And when we put something on our website, we have a certain bar of like, okay, that's the work for all of these cases. So technically it's possible, but the devil's really in it.
Hi. Oh.